They called him Hollywood's golden boy. Then they tried to erase him. Brendan Fraser went from billion-dollar blockbusters like The Mummy to complete disappearance, and no one ever told you why. Was it the injuries that nearly broke his body?
Rips off his fur bikini. Wait for it. Disappears into the rafters.
The dark secrets of Hollywood's powerful elite, or the betrayal that silenced him when he dared to speak the truth? For years, he lived in pain, mocked by the media, abandoned by the industry he once carried on his shoulders. But what Hollywood didn't see coming was his rise from the ashes. This is the shocking, untold story of how Brendan Fraser was destroyed and how he came back stronger than anyone ever imagined. The rise. When you think of Hollywood in the late 1990s, one name was impossible to ignore: Brendan Fraser. He wasn't just an actor, he was a phenomenon, a rising star who managed to capture the perfect blend of action hero toughness and comedic charm. While many actors of the era were known for their sculpted bodies and brooding expressions, Fraser brought something fresh. He had charisma, vulnerability, and most importantly, he had heart. Audiences didn't just watch Brendan Fraser, they connected with him. His big break came in 1997 with George of the Jungle. On paper, it was a silly comedy about a man raised by apes, but Fraser transformed it into something magical. He wasn't afraid to look goofy, to laugh at himself, or to throw his whole body into the performance. Behind the laughter and slapstick humor was a performer who gave everything to entertain his audience. And that's what made people fall in love with him. Children adored him as a jungle hero, while adults appreciated his dedication and warmth. The film wasn't just a hit, it cemented Fraser as a leading man with massive box office potential. But George of the Jungle was just the beginning. 2 years later, in 1999, Brendan Fraser starred in The Mummy. This was the role that catapulted him into true superstardom. Playing Rick O'Connell, a rugged adventurer caught in a battle against ancient forces, Fraser delivered one of the most iconic performances of his generation. The movie was a perfect mix of action, horror, romance, and humor, and Brendan carried it effortlessly. Unlike many action stars who relied purely on muscles and explosions, Fraser infused the role with a playful energy that made the character unforgettable. He could fight off an undead army in one scene and deliver a witty one-liner in the next. Audiences around the world couldn't get enough. The Mummy became a global hit, earning hundreds of millions of dollars and turning Brendan Fraser into one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. He wasn't just another actor in the crowd, he was the face of a new era of blockbuster films. And while critics often dismissed action movies as shallow entertainment, Fraser's work stood out because he always gave it depth. He brought humanity to roles that could have been flat stereotypes. During the early 2000s, Brendan's career soared even higher. He starred in The Mummy Returns, Bedazzled, and Journey to the Center of the Earth. He proved he could handle different genres: comedy, adventure, even drama. Hollywood loved him because he was versatile, and fans adored him because he was relatable. Unlike some of the untouchable stars of his time, Brendan felt approachable. He didn't carry the arrogance of Hollywood royalty. Instead, he came across as genuine, kind, and humble. But what really set Brendan Fraser apart was his dedication to his craft. He performed many of his own stunts, throwing his body into dangerous situations for the sake of authenticity. While this thrilled audiences, it came at a great personal cost, something the world would only understand years later. Still, during this golden era of his career, he was unstoppable. Casting directors saw him as a guarantee for box office success. Producers wanted his name attached to their projects, and fans eagerly awaited his next film. Brendan Fraser wasn't just rising, he was soaring. For a time, it seemed like nothing could stand in his way. He had the looks of a classic movie star, the comedic timing of a seasoned comedian, and the charm of a true leading man. Hollywood had found his golden boy, and audiences believed he would stay on top forever. But behind every shining rise in Hollywood, there are shadows waiting to emerge. For Brendan Fraser, the fame, the stunts, and the constant pressure were quietly taking their toll. At the time, no one could have predicted it. To the outside world, he was untouchable, a hero, an icon, a man destined to remain in the spotlight for decades. Yet, as history would soon show, even the brightest stars can be forced into darkness. The fall. For every dazzling Hollywood rise, there comes a turning point, a moment when the applause begins to fade and the spotlight grows colder. For Brendan Fraser, that moment arrived silently, almost invisibly, until it swallowed his entire career. What seemed like an unstoppable climb to the very top suddenly unraveled, leaving behind one of the most shocking disappearances in modern Hollywood history. The first cracks appeared not on the screen, but in Brendan's body. Unlike many actors who relied on stunt doubles, Fraser insisted on doing most of his own action sequences. In The Mummy and its sequels, he was constantly leaping, diving, and fighting through intense physical scenes. It thrilled audiences, but the price was brutal. Years of punishing stunts left his body battered. By the mid-2000s, Fraser required multiple surgeries on his spine, his knees, even his vocal cords. Each procedure was a reminder that the fearless action hero millions adored was, in reality, a man in constant pain. But physical injuries were only part of the story. Hollywood is a place that thrives on image, and Fraser's slowing career was noticed immediately. Studios that once saw him as a guaranteed success began to look elsewhere, choosing younger, fresher faces to lead blockbuster franchises. As Brendan struggled with his health, roles began to disappear. The action hero who once ruled the box office was suddenly absent from the very world he had helped dominate. Then came a revelation that shocked the world years later. In 2018, Fraser revealed that he had been sexually harassed in 2003 by a powerful Hollywood executive. The incident left him shaken, depressed, and emotionally scarred. But worse than the trauma itself were the consequences. Speaking out, even quietly, meant risking his career. Suddenly, invitations to major Hollywood events stopped arriving. Casting opportunities dried up. While no one admitted it openly, Brendan Fraser had been blacklisted, punished for daring to tell the truth in an industry that preferred silence. The impact was devastating. The man who had once been the face of global blockbusters was now fighting invisible battles: physical pain, emotional trauma, and the crushing weight of rejection. Hollywood, which had once embraced him, turned its back, leaving Fraser isolated and forgotten. The media added salt to the wound. Tabloids began running unflattering photos, mocking his weight gain, pointing out how different he looked compared to his prime years. They ignored the surgeries, the pain, the struggles of a man just trying to survive. To the public, it seemed Brendan had simply faded away. To Brendan, it felt like erasure. Behind closed doors, his personal life also crumbled. His marriage ended in divorce, leading to a painful custody battle. Financial troubles mounted. Depression set in. For someone who had once been cheered by millions, the silence was deafening. Brendan himself admitted he felt broken, both physically and spiritually. What made this fall even more tragic was its cruelty. Hollywood didn't just forget Brendan Fraser, it actively abandoned him. At one point, he was everywhere, on magazine covers, on theater screens, on red carpets. And then, almost overnight, he was nowhere. It wasn't simply a career decline. It was as though an entire industry had conspired to erase his name from its history. Fans noticed. Internet forums and blogs began asking, what happened to Brendan Fraser? Theories spread. Was it his injuries, his personal life, or had Hollywood truly turned against him? The truth was all of it, and more. By the early 2000s, Fraser was living a reality that no one had predicted. The shining star of The Mummy had been replaced by silence. No major roles, no blockbuster projects, no recognition. For years, it seemed Brendan Fraser's story had ended, not with applause, but with abandonment. But while Hollywood believed they had buried him, Fraser was quietly enduring, waiting, and healing. And as the world would later see, his story wasn't finished. It was only paused. The silence. When a star as bright as Brendan Fraser suddenly vanishes from the big screen, the silence becomes deafening. For years, audiences who had grown up watching his films were left asking the same question: where did he go? To many, it seemed as though Hollywood had quietly erased him, as if he had never been the face of one of its most successful franchises. But behind the curtain, Brendan was living through some of the most painful and private battles of his life. The injuries that had begun during his peak years only worsened with time. Every jump, every fall, every stunt that thrilled audiences came with a hidden cost. By the late 2000s, Brendan had undergone several surgeries, a partial knee replacement, procedures to repair his back, and even vocal cord surgery. Each operation left scars not just on his body, but on his spirit. For a man once celebrated as an invincible action hero, the reality of being unable to move without pain was crushing. The silence from Hollywood wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Away from the cameras, Brendan was also navigating heartbreak. His marriage ended in divorce, followed by a difficult custody arrangement for his 3 sons. Family became his refuge, but also a reminder of the life he was struggling to balance. Financial pressures weighed heavily as well. The actor who once commanded millions per film now faced mounting expenses with far fewer opportunities. And then came the loneliness. Hollywood is an industry that thrives on relevance. If you're not in the headlines, if you're not starring in the latest blockbuster, you're forgotten. For Brendan, who had once been adored globally, the sudden absence of offers felt like abandonment. Events that had once welcomed him with flashing cameras and applause stopped sending invitations. The man who had filled theaters worldwide now found himself sitting in quiet rooms, wondering if the world still remembered him. The media wasn't kind. Paparazzi snapped unflattering photos, publishing cruel headlines about his changing appearance. The internet was flooded with speculation. What happened to Brendan Fraser? Some mocked his weight gain, others dismissed him as washed up. Few cared enough to ask the real question, why was he struggling? Instead of empathy, he was met with ridicule. For Brendan, who had given his body and soul to his craft, this silence, this indifference, was more painful than the injuries themselves. But in that silence, something else was happening. Brendan Fraser was surviving. He poured his energy into fatherhood, into being present for his children. He focused on healing, both physically and emotionally. Though depression loomed like a shadow, he refused to let it completely consume him. He stayed away from the spotlight, but not because he had given up, because he was trying to rebuild himself. During this time, small roles began to quietly appear. He took supporting parts in television and independent films, often overlooked by mainstream media. To some, these seemed insignificant, but to Brendan, they were lifelines, a way to keep his love for acting alive, even if the world wasn't watching. It wasn't the glamorous Hollywood life he once knew, but it was a reminder that he still had a place in storytelling. The silence lasted nearly a decade. For fans, it felt like an eternity. For Brendan, it was survival mode, years spent healing, enduring, and waiting for a moment he didn't know would ever come. Hollywood had turned its back, and the world had largely moved on. But deep down, Brendan still carried the same spirit that had made him a star. Resilience, kindness, and the quiet strength to keep going even when no one was cheering. It seemed, for a long time, that Brendan Fraser's story had ended in obscurity. But what no one realized was that this silence wasn't the end. It was the quiet before one of the most remarkable comebacks Hollywood would ever witness. The comeback. After nearly a decade of silence, when the world had almost forgotten Brendan Fraser, a spark began to glow again. It didn't happen with an explosion of headlines or a massive Hollywood deal. Instead, it started quietly, with small roles that slowly reminded audiences, and Brendan himself, that his story wasn't over. The first signs of his return came in unexpected places. He appeared in television series like The Affair, and later took on the role of Robot Man in DC's Doom Patrol. Though hidden behind a costume and voice work, his performance carried a raw honesty that fans immediately connected with. For many, it was the first time in years they had seen Brendan back in action. Social media lit up with excitement. Old fans who had grown up watching The Mummy rushed online to celebrate his return. Younger audiences, who had only heard of his past success, were discovering his talent for the first time. Slowly, Brendan Fraser's name began to resurface. Then came supporting roles in acclaimed projects like Steven Soderbergh's No Sudden Move. These weren't blockbuster leads, but they were important steps, a reminder to Hollywood that Brendan still had the power to command attention on screen. What made these roles so special wasn't just the performances themselves, but the story behind them. Audiences knew he had been gone, they knew he had suffered, and now they were watching a man rise again. His comeback wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, and people felt it. The redemption. Every great Hollywood story has a climax, but Brendan Fraser's redemption wasn't written by a studio, it was written by life itself. After years of exile, pain, and silence, the world finally turned its eyes back to him. And this time, instead of pushing him away, Hollywood opened its arms. Brendan's comeback was no longer just a possibility, it became a triumph, sealed in history with one of the most emotional moments ever seen on the Oscar stage. When The Whale began gaining critical attention, people knew Brendan was on the verge of something extraordinary. Award season buzz grew louder with every review, every standing ovation. But for Brendan, this wasn't about trophies. It was about being seen again, being valued not just as an actor, but as a human being who had endured. The Brendan Fraser standing before audiences in 2022 wasn't the young action hero of the Mummy days. He was older, softer, carrying visible scars. Yet it was those very scars that made his performance unforgettable. In March 2023, Brendan Fraser's journey reached its pinnacle. On Oscar night, he sat in the audience, visibly nervous, surrounded by peers who once might have overlooked him. When his name was called for Best Actor, the room erupted in applause. Brendan, overwhelmed, walked to the stage with tears in his eyes. His acceptance speech wasn't polished Hollywood glamour. It was raw, heartfelt, and filled with gratitude. "I started in this business 30 years ago," he said, his voice breaking, "and things didn't come easy for me. But I just want to say thank you. This is what the multiverse looks like." Brendan Fraser's story isn't just about movies, it's about life itself. It's about how even the brightest stars can be broken, forgotten, and pushed aside, yet still rise again, stronger than ever. Hollywood tried to erase him, but resilience, truth, and undeniable talent brought him back to the very top. His journey reminds us that no matter how dark the struggle, there is always a chance for redemption. And now, Brendan Fraser stands not as a fallen star, but as a symbol of hope for every dreamer who has ever been told they weren't enough. Because in the end, legends don't fade, they rise.